Hey, Dave. Right. Thanks a lot for coming on the show. It's great to have you.
Lovely to speak, Pete, as always. I'm looking forward to this very much.
Yeah, me too, man. There's so much to talk about because you're a very varied and interesting guy with a long and flowery past. But I thought I thought maybe we could start with what's going on with you at right now. What's the big project that you're working on right now?
Firstly, no one's ever said a long and flowery past before, but I quite like that, and it's probably truer than the listeners realise when we get onto some of that stuff. But I'll take it as a compliment. Well, to be honest with you, right now I'm in transition. Really, I've just come off a month being on a boat on the way to COP26, which I know you visited as well. So I'm looking forward to comparing notes on that. But I think even more zoomed out, it's a bit of a transition for me from what has been a very broad, existential, soul-searching 5 years, actually, since I left my last business, and some of the best years of my life, actually. But I'm on the way back. I'm winding myself back into the matrix, trying to clamber back on grid, trying to think about money for the first time properly since I was 21, but really since about 5 years ago.
So what is it that you've got many things that that you're doing for climate change. Let's talk about Our Carbon. What's Our Carbon all about?
Our Carbon is all about helping small, medium UK companies get smart about the climate, get smart about their carbon budgets, more specifically, set goals, reduce their emissions, and then find the right kind of quality offsets to offset that which they can't yet remove from their processes. And so we take a kind of friendly coaching approach to trying to help guide people from a place of ignorance to a place of having a solid plan. And frankly, that's the kind of thing that needs to happen at a governmental level as well. There's a lot of net zero chat, but do people actually understand the carbon mathematics that underpin this whole transition that we need to make? And often people are embarrassed to admit that they don't really. But the good news is not that complicated. So that's why we started this, trying to make it easy and accessible for anyone to understand carbon, how it works, scope 1 to 3, and make a plan that suits.
When
we broke even last month, so that's a nice milestone in the journey. So, elusive, and it's been a while since I've been in that kind of position, but really, really exciting and fantastic work by Laura, our CEO, to get us there.
Yeah, that's amazing. I've worked at some startups that have been going for 10 years and still not broken even. So that's good going. But when I started on this climate journey, not to use somebody else's phrase, there's a competing podcast called My Climate Journey, which we probably shouldn't be talking about. There's I went out and interviewed a whole bunch of people in the street to say, what is climate change? What can we do about it? What are you doing about it? And I was very surprised to learn that the majority of people kind of feel that climate change is a massive challenge. It's probably the biggest challenge that we're facing as society, but the individuals didn't really know what to do. So they say, well, I recycle. Some of them would say, I try to eat less meat. Some of them would say that I drive less. But in general, individuals wouldn't know what the causes of their contribution to global warming were. Are you finding that that's the same with SMEs?
I think it's changing. I think, I've seen a real spike in the market broadly and the narrative, but also in inquiries to the company in the last few months as this net zero chat is coming in, because although it is just chat, it is quite specific. It's technical in its nature. It's not just talking about warming or climate change. It's talking about us moving something quantitative. So I think that is actually helping hone people in. But I'm sure we'll go back into the backstory, but I think the one thing to say that really changed my conception of climate change was learning about Miles Allen's work from Oxford University, the Cumulative Carbon Budget. And when I understood that despite how crazy complex our biosphere is, that actually it works out that we have an actual carbon budget, a maximum amount of carbon that we can expel into the air, and that there is currently just under 400 gigatons of it left, and we're expelling it at just under 40 gigatons a year, then all of a sudden it just became an issue of budgeting and mathematics for me. Well, we're doing it at a rate of 40 a year times by 10. That's the whole budget spent. So I know how to do budgeting. I don't always do it very well, but I know how it works. And I know how to try to create interventions or get the right loan facilities, or, you start to think about it like a business, And so for me, that was a real step change in my kind of comprehension and making the whole thing feel a bit more tractable rather than this intractable problem that's way over my head that I can't really get a grip on. And so now we're just trying to, day by day, step by step, one by one, help individuals, companies, and even governments to figure out an appropriate plan in light of that revelation.
Yeah, interesting. So that's a really useful way of coming at it, isn't it? This is how many tons or gigatons we've got left. Just for clarity, what happens when we've spent all of our budget?
The parts per million of carbon in the air get to a place where it's too high, and the rays from the sun are going to get magnified, too warm, and we start facing problems that we don't want to encounter at a rate that we don't want to encounter them. And I think misconception, it's often conjures the wrong pictures in people's minds what climate change really means. But I think from my understanding, the most likely problem is wacky events happening at a frequency that's intolerable for us, really. Fires, meltings, storms that cause almost irreversible damage if they come at a rate that we can't recover from, and that's the thing we're trying to avoid. So
is it kind of linked to the 1.5 degree or the 2 degree or the 3 degree scenarios that we hear about?
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, that the IPCC report, the 1.5 degree limit, that is a function of what we're describing. They're basically setting limits of what they think governmentally we can afford to sort of manage, repair, come back from. And at above 1.5, we think it'll get too devastating to actually be able to manage. We're already facing those problems. In fact, I did a really amazing podcast. I wasn't amazing, he was amazing. The other day, whilst I was at COP, with a guy called Avinash Pasaud. I do a little podcast now and again as an excuse to speak to clever people that I want to talk to, called New Agreements. And he is the finance advisor for Mia Mottley, the Barbadian Prime Minister. And he's come up with this genius idea using an IMF instrument called an SDR, a special drawing right, which basically could release the amount of green finance into the right places at the right time for the right things that we need to try and make this transition at an appropriate time scale. What he basically says is all these ideas floating around are good, but none of them are at the right scale. We need to release 50 trillion of green transition finance into the hands of the right people at the right time. And if we release 10 trillion of SDRs over 20 years, so $500 billion a year, the private sector will leverage that fourfold and we'll get our 50 trillion. Anyway, it's brilliant. But the story he told me, sorry to come back to what we're talking about the devastation, is he said, we hear all about these Germany floods. It's so devastating, it's so terrible, people losing their homes and lives, but it won't have affected even 0.5% of GDP for Germany. Whereas he was talking about an island, which name I can't remember, and he said last year there was a storm and they're on the front lines of climate change, and the likelihood and the rate of this storm hitting has been increased because of climate change. In 4 hours, it wiped out 220% of their GDP. And so that's the kind of event we can't suffer more regularly in more economies, because we just won't have any ability to recover from it. We won't have the economic firepower. And so, yeah, so there's quite a few levels there that are quite illuminating in what he's talking about. I like that he talks about the right kind of scale for economic facilities. I like that he's bringing my attention to where this is already happening and highlighting the sort of economic effect of these disasters. And it kind of makes sense, doesn't it, that there's only so many of those disasters that we can suffer collectively if we want to continue to live with a certain level of civility.
I don't know where change starts. I'd love to get your view on this. Because on the one hand, when the government introduces new legislation, that changes the world, doesn't it? But then I don't know whether governments dare to change legislation unless the populace are up for it. So I don't know whether it's better to try and convince the government to change law, or whether it's better to try and convince the people in the street to change their behaviours.
Well, I think social change starts a lot earlier than both of those places, if you know what I mean. I think social change starts in, I mean, call it spiritual, call it otherwise, but awakening in a few people, and spreads through these networks of friends, really, kind of off-grid friendships that aren't transactionally based, aren't like your job, your livelihood doesn't depend on it. You just, for the love, you connect with these different people and share thoughts and ideas around dinner tables. And I think that fabric forms the kind of mycelium network, if you like, that can spread ideas that then slowly rises into the institutions of society. And you're right, I think that there's a push and a pull where at the end of it, you know, you end up with legislation change, but that is right at the end of social movements. Rather than right at the beginning. It's not where it starts at all. It's, you know, I always liken it to Simon Cowell on The X Factor. You know, in a way, he's got all the control. He's the executive producer and everything like that. But actually what he does is whacks a bunch of people on stage and listens to the audience behind him. And if they go mental for the people on stage, he puts them through. It's that voice from behind him that is telling him what's going to make him money, because the market's already giving him the real-time survey, if you like, and so he just responds to that. And so I think that's where you go past the original inspirations and some of these networks of friends that concoct some ideas, and then you get into citizenship. You know, what does it mean for me to eat less meat, to fly less, to think about my carbon budgeting, to share a couple of ideas, to sit with a granny and talk with her, to, you know, do little bits day by day. You change the culture, and I think I'm a big fan of that. And then I think, and that pulls on the narrative, and then you slowly trickle up, you know. So that's why we started working with individuals 2 years ago on their carbon budgeting. Really passionate, engaged individuals. We've, over the last year, been working with small businesses, and now we're getting open doors into 50, 100 million, 200 million pound companies that are, it's trickling up the system. And then it'll get to the place where it's a win. It's a no-brainer win for a political party to put forward really strong policies at the next election that bring in carbon accountability, because that movement has already cascaded all the way up from the woods, if you like, all the way back up, all the way through the mid-sized institutions up to the top.
So okay, so this change is happening. You're seeing it happening. You're measuring the fact that it's happening. Is it? And these SMEs, when they ring you up and say, Dave, we need to do this. Can you come and help? Why are they saying that? Is that because their customers are saying it? Is it because their employees are putting pressure on them?
It's changing all the time, mate. Like, you know, a year ago, as I said, when we dealt with some passionate individuals, it would be because they had done something with XR. They had kind of taken some real activist energy and then, you know, wanting to do something with it. Maybe, and that normally comes from the fact that they're fell runners, or they're like outdoor events companies, people that are actually engaged naturally with the natural world. Not spending all their days in white boxes. They're actually confronted with it and have a connection with it and love it. But whereas now this sort of net zero narrative has cascaded through the consciousness, and medium-sized businesses with middle management are coming in just saying, yeah, we want to get to net zero ASAP. And I think Laura, our CEO, would say that's because they're getting some interest from elsewhere in their stakeholder network. I can think of one example, which is a big advertising company in London we're working with that deal with like household brands, you know, that your suppliers for energy and things like that. And they make adverts for them. And that they want to make sure that their advert production process is net zero now, because the big corporate brands are beginning to ask them about that. So they actually don't even care, to be honest with you. They're not coming from a thoughtful, caring position. They're just trying to satisfy. They're just making their market. They're just trying to satisfy their clients who are beginning to be concerned about this. So that's really interesting. That was a big shift for me. I was like, wow, we've really tipped from passionate individuals to like, this is just the demands of the market now. They don't want stuff that has got slave trade in it. They don't want stuff that's, like got some things that we've agreed, child labor, we don't want these things in our products anymore. And it's just becoming normal that we don't want carbon unaccountable processes to be linked to our supply chain.
Yeah, that's okay. That's interesting, because when I look at XR, the work that they're doing, it just doesn't resonate with me at all. That's not for me. But what you're saying is, the change, the impetus for change comes from lots of different places. But the work that XR are doing is massively helps a lot of people to kind of get on the boat. And for me, it was Greta and David Attenborough, right? So, I listened to them, and they don't do it. Greta's massively off-putting to lots of people. So we need everything. That's why I say I don't really, I would never be part of XR, but I love that they exist. It's very important that they exist.
I agree, and I think to be fair, like when I sort of described that flow of social change earlier, I think it sounded a little bit linear, like it only goes one way. I don't think that's actually the case. I do think it's a whole bunch of interrelated relationships. I've got friends in XR, I've got friends in government, I've got, you've got connections all over the place, and you're all influencing each other, pulling each other in different directions, and you need that plethora and diversity of voices to sort of move the whole conversation forward. So I totally agree with that. To me, 2 years ago, 18 months ago, I thought XR were bang on the money. I thought they were a perfect voice at the perfect time. But we're all a team, whether you like XR or not. They're fit to do something, and at the right moment in time, it's incredibly useful. But they're not the ones to like govern. They're not the ones to create innovations. That's just not what they're about. So if you're an innovator or a governor and you're looking at XR going, well, they'll never innovate or govern. Well, it's like, look at yourself, mate, because the point is they ring the bell, and then you're meant to pick up the baton. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's the time now for the innovators, and it's time for capital allocation and high risk venture capital to move into these areas and to have the right facilities at the right scale, a la that Avinash conversation, to make sure we do it well, and do it at the right rate that's fitting for the challenge that's in front of us. And so basically, I'm with you now. Give or take it, I'd say that XR's job is kind of done. There is a movement, and it's now down to the innovators and capital allocators to see if we move fast enough and smart enough and well enough over the next, 3 years maybe? Maybe it's over the next 3 years that we need to dump as much of the right capital into the right people at the right time to get the right solutions.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Let's do that. So listen, you're founder of Our Carbon, this startup that helps SMEs to get a handle on the causes of their contribution to global warming, and you help them to come up with a plan to get to net zero. And you broke even last month for the first time, ahead of schedule, according to the path of many startups. That's cool. That's very cool. But you've got so many other cool things going on in your life. I want to touch on some of those. So last week and the week before, you were in COP. You learned to sail. Did I get this right? You learned to sail to COP. Tell me about that.
Yes. Well, it's a bit generous because I wasn't the skipper. So there's a certain level of it's all about risk analysis. It's very similar to investing. When you're out and choosing every day whether to sail, you've got to take into account the tides, the path you're plotting, the weather patterns, the wave height, the currents. And it's a really complex algorithm of which you have very little control and very little insight over beyond a sort of 48-hour period. And I wasn't responsible for that. The skipper, my mate Andy, who actually also only learnt to sail for the trip, but I just give him most of the props for the brain power that was in it. I was sort of using my just powers of deduction from looking at the expressions on his face to decide whether or not I wanted to sail that day or not. But yeah, no, essentially the crew of 6 of us, none of us had sailed before, spent very little time on boats full stop, and 9 months ago decided to set out on this voyage. One of the guys came up with the idea and we all got behind it, and I connected it to Andy, who was the one who had the power to get the boat. And we went on a voyage from, Brighton round Padstow, the southernmost point, Land's End, in Cornwall, up through Padstow was where we really started the month's voyage. So it took a while to get there, and then started a month up through Wales, Isle of Man, Northern Ireland, up into the Scottish Hebrides, Isle of Mull, Cole, Lismore Island, and then back round the Mull of Kintyre, up into the Firth of Clyde, and into the River of Clyde, which is literally where the science centre for COP26 was. And it was intense. But yes, we learnt to sail.
I mean, that's a good question. Why did you choose to sail? That's a good question.
We chose to sail in October to go to COP26. We wanted to bring a different kind of message and do something transformational for ourselves, to go on a different kind of journey, to learn something new, to connect in a different way, not just to all just come in like sheep into the same space with the same mindset and the same story. It changes you being in nature. And said one of the guys, Paul, came up with the thought of sailing for the month. We did the passage planning, realised it could work. And in the end, we then met this professor called Dr. Steve Simpson from Bristol University, who's a marine biologist and an acoustics expert. So he uses acoustics to sort of listen to the ocean and figure out what's going on there, what species are present or absent, which by proxy can tell you interesting things like what's going on with warming waters and climate change. And he didn't believe it to begin with, but some of his team did it, that they can actually play frequencies, acoustic sounds, that draw corals in, that get the plankton, I can't remember the technical name for it, to settle, because they're just floating around, and then they sense this frequency and they settle, and as they settle they then begin to form the corals. And so the metaphor he talks about is that we're not just playing tunes from our club to get people to come in and dance. We're actually playing tunes to build the club, and then playing tunes to get people to come in and dance. And to me, this is like mind-blowing, like this is a story of hope in amongst what can feel like a disaster zone, where everything is just about, even the story of net zero is not a very exciting story, is it? Come on, everybody, let's get to nothing. It's not a very exciting story, if you know what I mean. Whereas, like when he speaks and he talks about these, our ability to affect our environment, to actually regenerate, revitalize, reinvigorate our ecosystems, it's a wonderful, wonderful story to be a part of, painting and imagining up together. So I'm at a very beginning, after this sort of amateur science experiment, which has released some good science. I'm at the very beginning of what I think is an exploration of trying to value that which we don't yet value well under the sea, in the same way that I've done the Corco Coin project to try and find a way to measure and value the carbon capture power of trees. It's just a bit easier on land because you can use your eyes. Under the water, eyes don't work very well. The sense of sound, of acoustics is far greater evolved in that murky environment. And so our ears are our eyes under the sea. And so that's going to be a bit of an exploration for me, I think, over the next year or so, figuring out how we can use that to value stuff and therefore protect it under the sea for biodiversity and carbon capture.
So is this what your Namibia thing is all about. I don't know anything about it other than somebody mentioned your name in conjunction with Namibia. I don't know whether that's ready to draw the veil back on yet.
Yeah. Well, just for fun. I mean, so our carbon really has 3 tiers now. As we go into 2022, we've got the helping SMEs figure their shit out, basically, and make a good plan and buy some current year carbon offset stuff to get them to net zero. The next tier is this blockchain system that we've built with Telos Network that measures and stores transparently the data of trees that are growing and capturing carbon, but allows people to own that from inception. They have the provenance, they own it from the beginning. It's basically a carbon investment scheme to be able to buck the price of carbon as it continues to cascade up through this decade. In the last year, we've already seen it go from roughly $20 a ton to $40, $50 a ton, and it will carry on rocketing past $100 a ton. So if you plant your own trees, you can have your own carbon capture power and not have to pay the market price when it comes online 5, 10, 20 years down the road.
There's many things that I want to talk about in there, but let's postpone those till next time, because let's talk about the stuff which is relevant right now, which we can't talk about next time, which is you and I have both been to COP. How was COP for you? What were your impressions of COP as a thing, and how did you enjoy / not enjoy being there?
I think my experience of being at COP was actually probably quite opposite to most of my friends who didn't go, because I had almost no awareness of the news or the headlines. I was just in it, meeting the people I was meeting. And to me, I still actually haven't read the summary report from COP about what policies got put in place and whether they collected the bits of money from the Paris Agreement that weren't sent and all that kind of stuff. To me, I experienced it almost as just a normal mega conference where it was good because it was bringing a lot of players together, quite influential, quite broad and diverse players together to get excited about making progress quickly on environmental subjects and doing deals on the environment. So I feel like it was working at the innovation level. Whether or not it worked at the diplomatic level, I actually, to be honest, don't know. Maybe you've got a bit more awareness, Pete. But yeah, to say my experience, I really enjoyed it. I was bloody knackered by the end of it. Only did a week and couldn't have done 2. So that's why we missed each other. But how did you find it?
We had the experience that probably most people had, which is that we were in the fringe. So you were in the blue zone, which is where all of the dignitaries and people like you hang out, as in people who have friends on the lawn with their lord friends. In the blue zone. But around that was like these massive high metal walls and huge police presence. In fact, the main people that we saw when we were in Glasgow for the week were police. There were more police than there were other non-police people. So there was the green zone, which was quite interesting. It was held, in the science centre where I believe you parked your yacht. That was pretty interesting. There were some events there; they were okay. But the fringe, I think, is where it was all happening for me. There were so many great events being put on by all sorts of people. New York Times put on a climate hub where there were loads of great kind of artistic things, beautiful. And we went to a few things that were run by either investors or founders. And there were presidents at one of those fringe events that we went to, and that felt like very effective and great fun. And we got actually a shout out from the Prime Minister of Tonga, which I was very moved about.
And for good reason as well, because you guys are backing good projects that are doing innovative work that makes a difference on the front lines of climate change. So that makes sense that you're getting that kind of that shout out.
We're trying to do the thing. I think his point was there's just not enough money flowing into the crazy ideas, and we need crazy ideas. He just finished a very moving part of his speech about how a lot of his island was underwater and what a struggle it was for everybody on that island, and how this technology that one of our founders, Dan, who's just a legend, is bringing to market is going to help them buy electricity at 1/7 of the cost. So wow. Yeah, so I was already pretty moved. So then when he gave a shout out to me, I was extremely moved.
Yeah. The can I just touch on 2 quick things? One is on the on this whole, not that it is a debate anymore, but the climate change debate, I'm like, why would you want to do anything else? Why, philosophically, it makes sense to me to get more in tune with nature, to waste less, to work with the brightest ideas that are, less noisy, less smelly, less all the things that we don't want. We want to have a sensorially exciting human experience on this planet. So, even if we're out by a little bit on our budgeting, it's the most exciting path I can imagine, being right at the center of this unfolding story. So there's only so much credence I would give to any even viable arguments that show other things. And secondly, you mentioned about with your lords on the lawn or whatever. But I just want to say, I know, but I do want to say, because I think it's important. I had when I got on the boat, I had no connections at COP. I had nothing to land. So a month before, I had nowhere to land. But my girlfriend works in social impact and managed to mention me in one conversation to one person who was at COP, who she connected me to somebody else who ended up on my boat, and then I messaged her back, and then, and then it's just this chain of trying to deal well with one person at a time and make something with each person, because every time you make something, you sort of bond and connect and trust each other more. And so and I only know one. Oh no, I know two lords. Do you know what I mean? And I can't. It's not. I grew up on a ex-council estate. I mean, albeit in Surrey, but I grew up. 6 of us in a 3-bedroom terrace house. It's not like. It's not like that's the world I roll in. But what I have found through spending a lot of my time kind of off grid in this, what I think is this sort of mycelium network of connecting with different friends in different places and getting different inputs into me, you do meet random people in random places, and I don't know lots of people in any one scene, but I know 1 or 2 good people in lots of random places, and they seem to pop up now and again. So it does happen that one of them, in this case, got a lordship, but it would be misleading to think that I know anybody else with a boat, or I know any other lords, or do you know what I mean? It's just I just have, and I would recommend that, is that people, when they find good people, whatever world they're in, if it's a good person that you vibe with, make something with them, become friends with them, stick with them, because it leads you down amazing adventures.
So I love that, connections between people. And I think I'd also point out that you did something, and it was quite inspirational, and that meant that people's heads swiveled around to look in your direction, because they thought, that's it's kind of what you were saying before about net zero. Let's get to nothing. That is not very inspirational. And so we need people to kind of paint a picture of, A, this is what actions we can take, and this is how we can all take those actions. And B, this is painting a picture of the future that we could live in. I think those are 2 extremely important things.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, look, we spend, especially in this generation, we spend all of our money on experience, basically. We want to go to Airbnbs, to travel, to restaurants, whatever it might be. We're spending all our money on experience. So that's what we want, and that's aspirational, is an exciting human experience. So for me, a vision of work that is engaging is one that marries what is valuable with something that is an exciting experience to be had, that might even transform us a little bit, that might even change us. That's the most exciting story, isn't it? Is I went here and I've come back different and hopefully better. So for me, getting on a train or getting in an Uber was not likely to do that going to COP. And if you want to see change in the world, if you want to see a change in people's behavior, then it needs to start in their hearts and minds. And if I want to see that in someone else, I have to be willing to try to go there myself. I have to try to be willing to show them that I'm experiencing something of transformative change in my own experience. And I don't know how to make any change in the world that doesn't start with me first trying to expose myself and make myself vulnerable to a change and a learning that might hurt as well, but also might give me a cool story and some nice YouTube videos that people can enjoy and get on board with the adventure. You know, that's the only way I know how to do it. That's the only way I know how to do anything that seems to be of any use.
Just to wrap up then, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future? And, you know, what does the world look like for you in 2050?
Just to wrap up, yeah?
Yeah. In 4 words or less.
I think I'm excited about the adventure. I'm excited about the adventure ahead of us. I think it is an adventure. I think I feel incredibly fortunate to be in the position I'm in, to be able to do the work I'm doing, live in a relatively safe country, both geopolitically and environmentally, frankly. So I have a good shot at doing lots of good stuff over the next 10, well, what are you talking, 50? So you're talking 30 years. So I'll be 65 by then. Do I think we'll sort it out? Maybe. Yeah. I think we're in it to win it. I do think we're in it to win it. I think there's going to be more pain. I mean, it's easy to throw big statements in. I think there'll be more pain than there needs to be. But I think I tell you, let me just say this. I left COP thinking I want to spend more time on islands for 2 reasons. One, who doesn't bloody love an island, right? and 2, like, if this is where it's happening, if this is where the harsh front of climate change is happening, I want to be sensitive to that. I want to be aware of that. I don't want to be the last to know. So for me, you know, actually both sides of that coin are really important. Going back to that sort of aspirational thing, like I want to enjoy my life, and I want, part of what makes me enjoy it is knowing that I'm making myself available and sensitive to the important things that affect you and change you and lead you down a path that's worth living. So I think there will be more islands in my future, and I'm excited about that, and it will be devastating and it will be wonderful, and there we go. What about you, mate? Are you hopeful?
Yeah, I am. I mean, I'm optimistic by nature, but before I got into this wheeze, you know, when I first discovered the real depth and real import of climate change, that actually made me quite depressed for a while, you know, and I thought we're proper boned. But now my life is all spent surrounded by incredible people, all trying to do their level best to bring amazing innovations to play, and while, like, to fix the climate emergency, and while they do that, try to create a better world for us all to live in. So day in, day out, I'm hearing great stories about this is what we imagine the future will be like. And yeah, it's a bubble. I live in a bubble, but it's a great bubble to be part of, and it's very inspiring.
Can I take this moment to sort of speak out my newfound clarity about what I'm going to try and do over the next year? Because there's lots of stuff out there, but I'd love to get clear. Like, we want to go from the 50 clients that we've got up to 1 million turnover this year. We want to maintain the break-even position all the way through. We don't need much profit, but we want to do that. We want to capture 50,000 tons of carbon. We want to invest in the most innovative projects. Like, we're working with some guys at the moment who are doing biochar from seaweed. So combining 2 really interesting tracks together. So we want to use our purchasing power from our clients to, like, put down on innovative projects to help them come to life. We want to scale our Corco Coin tree investment project. And I want to be able to come back on here in a year and hopefully have some adventures with you in the meantime, with some water and some boats.
Yes,
but I
please.
hopefully can come back on here in a year and tell you that we figured out how to do giant kelp valuations through using acoustics underwater. That would be creatively incredibly satisfying for me. So there we go. That's a year for me with the business, and hopefully that will be me doing my bit to help move this needle along over the next 3 years or so.
That seems like a great place to end it. Thanks a lot. That was awesome. Thanks a lot for your time, David Erasmus, ladies and gentlemen.